attention to TCU. And then David Hicks, high priority prospect target for the Oklahoma Sooners, will make his commitment on Wednesday. We'll talk a little bit about that on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Sooners. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. You can read my work covering the Sooners over at thesoonerswire.com. He's Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can also hear him Monday through Friday on 94.7 The Ref in Norman. Josh, it's midweek. We got some final things on Kansas State before we start looking at the Horned Frogs.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the Brent Venables press conference is really sort of the let's start turning the page, right? And the final look back really for Brent Venables as well, who, John, he kind of had a lot of the same sort of thoughts that a lot of us have said or hoped or wished would be the way Oklahoma would approach this, which is pretty simply the best message of all is, look, this isn't who you were. This isn't who you're going to be. You had a bad night. It doesn't mean you have to wind up having a bad season.
Trust and have a respect for, again, what it takes to play at a really high level. I said this before as well, that pressure, exposes both the good and the bad. And we got to foundationally rely on, how we do what we do. And again, the discipline that it takes to play at a high level. If that's discipline not to have a procedural issue, or a discipline to take the right angles to the football so we don't have a face mask, or the discipline to execute a screen and go so we're not running into receivers. All of those things lie at my feet, and certainly us as coaches, and then the players have to take ownership and accountability. I like the attitude, how our guys responded yesterday, the toughness after, again, having a bad night. And that's what I told them is, it certainly was a bad night, and for all of us, but it doesn't mean you have to have a bad year and a bad season.
That game film couldn't have been very much fun to watch if you're an Oklahoma Sooner player. I'm sure the coaches did not enjoy watching it either, but I think he's absolutely right on here. You have a bad night. It's a bad game. It, puts you behind the 8 ball a little bit as far as the college football playoff goes, but it doesn't mean that you can't still accomplish some things. Like, you can still win the Big 12, and you could still theoretically get into the college football playoff depending on how the rest of the season goes. There's no room for error here. There's no margin. And I think what he touched on there is just this idea that it takes work to stay disciplined and execute stuff fundamentally.
It does. And obviously they have to be much, much better in that category. I don't think Coach Venables is breaking news there. I don't think we're breaking news there saying that Oklahoma has to be much more gap sound, much more disciplined, and ultimately they've just got to be a more physical football team. But the proof is going to be in the pudding, right? As we, start inching closer to now, guess what? The season doesn't stop because you had a disappointing home loss to Kansas State. No, you keep on rolling, keep on going here in year one of Brent Venables. So you're going to be defined by whether or not you do, in fact, like plenty of other Oklahoma teams, bounce back from this and, again, make this just one weird, fluky – I don't want to say fluky because that's disrespectful to Kansas State. They went out and earned it. Adrian Martinez was great in the game, but you get what I'm saying. One night that things just were off kilter. It wasn't really who Oklahoma is, and you wind up losing the football game. You're terrible defensively, right? Don't make one loss a bad season.
And I think he was right in what he said. I think it was after Saturday's game, in that you're not defined by what goes well, and you're not necessarily always defined by what goes poorly too. And that's kind of how I try to live my life as well. Try not to define people by their worst moments. We're not defined necessarily entirely by the things we do at our lowest moment. And so I think the Oklahoma Sooners are still trying to figure out their identity. They're trying to determine who they are as a football team in 2022 and a program down the road. They still got a lot of growing to do. It's still a young team. I mean, Billy Bowman's a sophomore, Danny Stutzman's a sophomore, Ethan Downs a sophomore. You're playing freshmen like Jaren Kanak. You do have some seniors on this team, guys that have been around quite a bit: Deshaun White and David Agwebu, Woody Washington, Justin Broyles. But for the most part, there's a lot of key pieces that are fairly young on this team. And while we've seen a lot of really good things out of those guys, they weren't there on Saturday. So, but it just kind of all gets bottled up into this. You had a bad night at the same time that Adrian Martinez and Deuce Vaughn had a great night. And anytime that happens, it's recipe for disaster. Like, you can have a bad night and still win a football game. Like, I think back to like the Iowa State win last year when Oklahoma's offense was not good. The defense was pretty good, but they still found a way to win that one kind of going away, even though it was kind of a close one at the end. Oklahoma, for the most part, dominated that game. That's kind of the inverse of how it could work, where you have a bad day and still win.
Yeah. I mean, it can play out that way. Obviously, defensively, just too many potholes for Oklahoma in this one versus Kansas State. And,
we lost Josh here for a second. He's frozen because, the wonders of internet and technology. But yeah, I think what we're dealing with Oklahoma is just figuring out how to recover from bad football. And here's what Brent Venables had to say, just from what they saw at times.
I think what I saw was guys afraid to make mistakes. We played on our heels. We weren't physical at the point of attack. We haven't been that way. Well, that's what I saw. I saw guys pressing, trying to do a little bit too much. I didn't think we played very well from just having, situational awareness. Didn't think that we did a great job of that. Again, there's a level of anticipation when you know the situation, and I just didn't think we put it all together for whatever reason. We didn't do that. So I don't know about rat poison. Interesting, term, but handling success is a very difficult thing, for everybody. And I've always taken tremendous pride in being the anti success, patting everybody on the back. And so we worked hard at that last week. I'm not sure whether or not that had anything to do with it or not. I don't. That's not what I saw on the field. I just saw, bad football at times.
So, there was a lot of concern, and we actually had an episode about this last week, was how would Oklahoma handle all of the success and all of the flowers being laid at their feet. And, you like to think, and we had one of the parents of one of the players kind of respond to just our tweet, promoting the show, just saying, oh, the players aren't even thinking about any of that. And, it was not irrelevant to this past Saturday. It seems like, they were pressing as a team, and Venables mentioned they were afraid to make mistakes. When you're afraid to make mistakes, that means you're not locked into what you're trying to accomplish as a unit, and you're playing tight. When you're playing tight, you're just trying too hard. You got to be able to play free and play instinctual within the scheme. And perhaps this idea of them being so good the first 3 weeks and them being perfect and staying perfect, maybe it was too much at the time, again, for a team that has a lot of young pieces on it. And I don't want to go down the road of was a loss the best thing that could happen for this team, because it's never a good thing to lose. You touched on that the other night. But perhaps maybe it just kind of frees them up to get back to just playing football and not worrying about trying to make every perfect play.
It's just interesting to hear Brent Venables' perspective on a lot of that. And I, quite frankly, I like him being candid there and, not saying, I don't know. I mean, in some ways, you could almost define it as a little bit of a cop out, right, John? If you say, yeah, I think we bought in a little bit too much to what the press clipping said, or these guys got a little bit too comfortable with, all the nice things that were being said about them. I like that Brent Venables just came out and said, you know what? It was just bad football is what I saw. I don't know that it had anything to do with, what John and Josh were saying over at Locked On Sooners, or what the YouTube commenters, all the nice things they had to say about Oklahoma over there on Locked On Sooners. That's I did wonder, I'll be the first to admit, I mean, that's why we had that episode last week. I was curious how Oklahoma was going to handle being this program like a Georgia is a lot of the time here these last couple of years, or Bama is a lot of the time throughout seems like season after season with Nick Saban, where you're lauded and everything out there in the sports atmosphere is positive about you. And I'll take Brent Venables at face value that, to him, it's just bad football. Obviously, though, the return in that department for OU did not handle that well last week. If that was in any way, shape, or form a factor, probably I'm just going to side with the head football coach that John probably really wasn't much more of a factor other than, you just didn't play well for whatever reason. And Kansas State played really well, right, against Oklahoma. Okay, with those clips out of the way, it's time to officially start turning our attention to TCU. The K-State loss, right? It's in the history books now. There's no changing that. So let's break down TCU. First, let me tell you, this episode brought to us by BetOnline.net. It's your number one source for all of your pro and college football betting needs, sports information as well this season. Find all of the latest football league, that's the National Football League developments, matchups, news, podcasts, all of that, including this week's games and more over there at BetOnline.net, your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including, of course, live betting, esports, scores, and more. So head on over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, that's where the game starts. Where better, John, to start our breakdown of TCU than just with the head football coach, right? I mean, Brent Venables, he didn't really waste any time this week in his weekly press conference in jumping right in on the types of challenges that TCU presents.
Practice last night, and looking forward to going on the road to TCU. Got a chance to play a really good TCU team who's had a great start to their season. Is one of the top offenses in the country. Got the quarterback leads the nation in passing efficiencies at 77% completion percentage, 8 touchdowns, no interceptions. Max Dugan's really playing well. Got a great offense up to this point in time in the season. They've done incredibly well. Second in the country in yards per play at 8.1 yards a play, and a bunch of seniors and juniors on their offense. They've done a great job at systematically putting them in position to be successful. Defense improved from what they've been, and have a coach coordinating their defense that had incredible success at Tulsa systematically as well. Got excellent players. Again, on both sides of the ball, terrific skill. As good as skills we'll see, certainly better than what we've seen up to this point in time at receiver. And so got a great challenge for us. Our guys are anxious and eager to improve and get better and show that last week wasn't really reflective and indicative of the type of performance that we're capable of. But at the end of the day, got to dust ourselves off, like I said before, and we got to be more precise in everything that we do. And to me, everything starts with discipline, and discipline to have the mindset of, doing all the little things that it takes, over and over and over and over and over until you can't get it wrong.
over and over and over and over. It's interesting. He does talk about TCU as being one of the better offenses in the country. And statistically, that bears out. I mean, TCU is averaging a ton of points per game. They've scored more than 38 in every single game. They're 3-0, beating Colorado, Tarleton, and SMU. Currently averaging 46.3 points per game, good for 9th in the country, allowing just 21.3 points per game on defense, good for 51st in the country. So Josh, he talks about Duggan being one of the better quarterbacks in the country statistically through the first 3 games of the season. Just a few little notes here from Pro Football Focus. He mentioned that they're averaging 8.1 yards per play. Max Duggan averaging 8.1 yards per throw. Like every time he throws the ball down the field, average depth of target is at least 8.1 yards per throw. He's been sacked 7 times. Or was it 8 times? Sorry, he's been sacked a few times. And he's been good. He's been efficient. I mean, completing 77% of his passes. He's had 4 drops on the season. You look at adjusted completion percentage that allows you to take away the drops and a throwaway, and his adjusted completion percentage is 87.9%. Like, you're taking away the plays that aren't on him, and he's completing nearly 90% of his passes this season, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, looking just briefly at who he's played, you're talking about Colorado, who's arguably one of the worst teams in the country right now. Tarleton State, who nobody should be scheduling if you're a Power 5 team. And SMU, crosstown rival, who it's been back and forth at times throughout the years. TCU generally has the upper hand in that matchup. But they went and they scored 42 points against the Mustangs. So, and SMU is a pretty solid group of 5 American Athletic Conference team. So a solid win for them. I still don't know what to make of TCU yet. He does, Duggan does, pose some problems as a runner and as a passer. It looks like his passing has gotten better than what is in previous years. Just looking real quickly, like he's never completed this high a percentage of his passes. His career high coming into the season was 63.6%. That was last year. For his career, he's a 59.5% passer. So he's either taken a big step up, or the level of competition has been such that he's been able to just complete a high percentage of his throws.
I'm basically going to evaluate TCU, John, I think this week solely through their performance against SMU. I know that we can look at all of the different numbers for TCU, and I'll just say, let me also just say right off the top, Brent Venables is correct. Obviously, since the statistics say that TCU is the greatest offense of all time, they are in fact the greatest offense of all time. As we learned last week, let's not say negative things about our opponent before Oklahoma plays said opponent. But obviously, Duggan's jokes aside, Duggan's an experienced quarterback. He's somebody that can both hurt you running the football with his legs, or throwing it. He's your typical dual threat type quarterback. Now he's a little bit different from Adrian Martinez in that regard. He's not as explosive of a runner, but he's definitely capable in that regard. Just again, looking at TCU through the lens of what happened versus SMU, Tanner Mordecai. Obviously, we're familiar with Tanner Mordecai as a quarterback. Started out at Oklahoma, threw for 372 yards, couple of touchdowns, was intercepted a couple of times versus TCU. So just looking at that, I come away from that and say, okay, you can take your Tarleton State game and your Colorado game and let's forget about it. And probably you could probably have this same conversation, by the way, about Oklahoma and only judge Oklahoma off the Kansas State game, right? What I see from those numbers, though, is I see a defense for TCU that, to me, Oklahoma ought to be able to go score points just the same way that SMU did. And I see an offense in TCU that can put points on the board. So Oklahoma's going to have to be much, much better defensively this week. And Quentin Johnston, I mean, I probably don't even really need to share a whole lot about him. I think everybody kind of knows what he is and who he is and what he brings to this offense. When Brent Venables says this is the best receivers that we've seen so far, I mean, really he's talking about, he could say collectively, but I think he's talking about Quentin Johnston.
What's interesting about TCU is they're throwing the ball to a ton of guys. Like Quentin Johnston doesn't even lead the team in receiving right now through the first few weeks of the season. But they've got a bunch of guys who've gotten, let's see that, they've got 6 guys that have at least 5 receptions on the season. Nobody has more than 8 receptions on the season. So they're spreading the ball around to a ton of people. 13 different players have caught passes so far. And again, it's been a lot of high efficiency stuff. Jordan Hudson, a guy who was an Oklahoma Sooners commit at one point in time, now at TCU, he's caught 7 passes for 102 yards and a touchdown. So it is a deep group. Like Quentin Johnston's numbers are they look kind of marginal. 8 catches for 73 yards on 16 targets. So he's not really performing to the same level of what we come to expect. But don't get me wrong, like I still fear that dude. Like, don't let him get a one-on-one situation where he can catch a 50-50 football. Like, because he killed Oklahoma last year. He was like 8 for 170 and 3 touchdowns, like over 170 yards and 3 touchdowns, like absolutely torched the Sooners last season. So fear him. Definitely. Kendre Miller, a very good running back, very talented player, sat behind Zach Evans for the last couple of years, now getting an opportunity to lead the Horned Frogs in rushing, and he's doing a pretty solid job. I think he's got over 270 yards rushing through 3 games on the season and averaging over 6 yards per carry. He's got 3 touchdowns, 250 yards, 6.6 yards per carry. He's forced 11 missed tackles, and he's had 5 runs of 15 yards or more, 8 of 10 yards or more. So an explosive player in his own right. And if Oklahoma's not careful, could make some big plays in the running game for the TCU Horned Frogs. So this is an explosive offense that is going to definitely challenge the Oklahoma Sooners defense. And I like that they're getting this challenge right on the heels of having their worst game of the season, because they can't sleep on anybody after the way they performed. They can't think too highly of themselves after the way that they performed this past Saturday, and have to go in with their A game against TCU, regardless of who they've played. This defense is going to have to step up and play much better to slow down this team. Well, go ahead, Josh. Do you have any more thoughts on that before we?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just real quickly in closing, and in addition to that, just what you said, man. I mean, look, the Tarleton State game, I agree with you, by the way. They should be thrown in jail for scheduling that game. It's ridiculous. I'm sick of these games.
Straight to jail right away.
Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Get out of here. But, it's the number 9 offense. All of the yards per play figures, Duggan, everything we've talked about with them offensively. Yes, it's a legitimate challenge for Oklahoma. And it is good that it comes on the heels of Kansas State, because look, we're gonna have a pretty solid idea going down to the Cotton Bowl, I think, about whether or not that was a potential blip on the radar versus Kansas State, or if, man, sorry, Oklahoma fans, you got yanked back into a mirage once again defensively.
Yeah. So one thing that I didn't mention is the 7 sacks. Like, he got sacked 5 times against SMU, twice against Tarleton. So like, this offensive line can be had a little bit. And if we don't see Oklahoma's defensive line and the front 7 be able to get to Dugan and bring him down and collect a few sacks in this game, I think it will be cause for concern, because they're showing that they've got some warts as an offensive line. Now, his athleticism is going to make up for some of that, but you can only run so far. And like we mentioned earlier this week, he's not the same kind of runner that Adrian Martinez is. He's not going to be as difficult to bring down if you can get some hands on him. But again, he's playing great football. He's got a high completion percentage. TCU's looking really good offensively. They got a bunch of weapons that they can spread the ball around to. I'll be curious to see how this team responds. And it sounds like Oklahoma's offense should be able to start fast and have their way against TCU's defense, if the SMU game is any indication of what this TCU defense looks like at all. Coming up next, Oklahoma's got a big prospect on the radar that's going to be making his commitment on Wednesday afternoon. So we'll touch on that real quickly before we go. But first, let me talk to you about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the place to go for all of your hiring needs. These days, every potential new hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Then add you can go to LinkedIn, add your job, the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. If you haven't used LinkedIn, if you've ever been a part of hiring, it's hard to know what you're getting through the interview process, but LinkedIn helps you out with their screening questions. So go check it out. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Josh, it's been a wonderful few months for the Oklahoma Sooners on the recruiting trail. They haven't gotten everybody that they've wanted. Jordan Raynaud just a few weeks ago, ended up committing to Alabama after Oklahoma was heavily in that race. But Oklahoma's trending in the right direction for five-star defensive lineman, the number one defensive lineman in the 2023 class, David Hicks, who will be making his commitment on Wednesday afternoon, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. You can watch it on ESPN, which that's big time. If you're on ESPN as a high school kid, that's pretty big time. So the Sooners heading in the right direction with that one adds a huge element to their defensive front that already has some really high quality prospects on it in Colton Vasek, 4-star player, Derek LeBlanc, 4-star player, and Adepoju Adebare, a 5-star player. If the Sooners are able to land David Hicks, it would make their third 5-star player in the 2023 recruiting class.
You got me there, John?
Yep, I got you.
Okay, so I think I froze up and went to I don't know. I got whisked away into outer space there for a little bit.
Went to the multiverse for a minute.
That's right. Yeah. So I'm sorry about that. Yeah, this would be, obviously a gigantic get for Oklahoma. Probably we need to have expounded thoughts on this with Hicks. If it does come to fruition, it feels like it's going to come to fruition for Oklahoma, just reading the tea leaves and honestly putting a lot of stock into what somebody like Parker Thune has hinted at or had to say over the last, several weeks and months. So I feel good about it for Oklahoma, but man, just point blank for OU. Adebare, Vasek, up and down. This recruiting class defensively is stacked up front, but just specifically David Hicks, man, this would be, to me, the missing link that Oklahoma's not been able to get committed and not been able to get signed for a long, long time, that OU fans, man, have been pining for. They've been asking, where is David Hicks, man? Why can we not sign a 5-star defensive lineman? Not one. I'm not asking every year, but are you kidding me? Not once a graduation cycle, not once in 8 years, not once in a decade. It's Oklahoma, man, and it sounds like OU's about to land that guy now. So I don't think you can understate the importance of this. Or you can't overstate the importance of this. It's gigantic for the Sooners. They've needed this type of talent, and feels like they're going to get it, John.
Yep, and we'll have some reaction to that once the commitment drops. Whichever way it goes, we'll let you know our thoughts and our takes on that tomorrow afternoon after David Hicks does commit. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in. Again, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Go over there, check it out, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Drop a comment in the comment section. Drop a question as well. Let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about as we get ready for TCU, some of your concerns, your questions heading into that game. But until next time, he's Josh Helmer. I'm John Williams. We'll catch you then. Boomer Sooner.